The Galactic Union stretched across 1,000 stars. Hundreds of alien species lived under its laws, the tall, the scaled, the winged, and the luminous. But among all of them, there was one new species that everyone agreed was harmless. Humans. They were small, soft-skinned, emotional creatures from a distant blue world called Earth. They talked about peace, art, and cooperation more than any other species. Their technology was decent, their science impressive, but their behavior, too kind, too gentle, made them seem weak. To most aliens, humans were diplomats, doctors, teachers, not warriors. That belief was about to change. It began on Zarthos Prime, a world of glass towers and golden clouds. The Galactic Union Council had gathered there for a special summit. They were revising the interstellar laws of war, a set of rules that decided what was acceptable during battle. Inside the great silver chamber, alien leaders floated, slithered, and shimmered in their own strange ways. Holographic screens surrounded the table, showing maps of colonies, peace treaties, and military codes. And among all those alien faces, one human stood silently in the corner, Sergeant Mason Cole. He was tall by human standards, but among the aliens he looked almost small. His brown hair was cut short, his jaw scarred, his uniform plain and practical. He carried no weapon, only a small data pad and a calm expression. To the aliens he looked like a bodyguard, nothing more. The Counselor of Zarthos, a tall being with blue crystal skin, turned to him and smiled politely. "Sergeant Mason," he said, his voice echoing like glass, "your species has been assigned as observers. We appreciate your peaceful reputation." Mason only nodded. "Happy to help, sir." Whispers filled the room. Some aliens laughed softly, others exchanged glances. Humans, always polite. Always harmless, but Mason didn't seem offended. He stood still, watching and listening. His calm eyes missed nothing. Hours passed. The meeting continued. They spoke about war crimes, humane conduct, and ethical rules of engagement. The alien generals debated over how much destruction should be allowed in a conflict. Then a sudden alarm cut through the air. A red holographic warning flashed across the chamber walls. "Alert! Outpost 17 under attack. Unknown forces." Gasps echoed. The alien generals rose to their feet. "Who dares attack a Union base?" one shouted. An aide rushed in, breathless. "It's a group of Khan raiders, sir. They've broken through the defense line. Our security drones are failing." The room exploded with confusion. Orders, questions, and panic filled the air. Mason stepped forward quietly. "How far is Outpost 17 from here?" "Only 1 orbit away," the aide stammered. "But we cannot intervene without a full council vote." Mason frowned. "You're waiting for permission while your people die." The Zarthos counselor raised his crystal hand. "We must follow the law, human. If we respond too harshly, it could be a war violation." Mason's eyes narrowed. He took a slow breath and looked around the table. "War violation?" he repeated softly. "Yes," said another general proudly. "We do not use lethal force unless authorized. Our laws forbid excessive retaliation. We are civilized." Mason's voice dropped to a low, calm tone. "And how many civilians are at that outpost?" The aide hesitated. 400, mostly engineers and families." Silence filled the chamber. Mason placed his datapad on the table. "Then you have a choice. Sit here and debate, or let me handle it." The alien stared, confused. The counselor asked, "And what will you do, human?" Mason looked up, his eyes cold and clear. "Show you what a war violation really looks like." Minutes later, Mason stepped into the hangar bay. The alien pilots whispered as he passed. He climbed into a small scout ship, an older human-made model, scratched and dented. The aliens watched him with disbelief. "Is he serious?" one muttered. "He's going alone," another said. "He'll die before reaching orbit." But Mason didn't care. He sealed the cockpit and launched. The ship roared out of the hangar, cutting through Zarthos's golden clouds and into the black void of space. The stars stretched around him, sharp and cold. His sensors blinked red. Outpost 17 was burning. Below, the outpost floated above a barren moon. Explosions tore through its defense towers. The Khan raiders, Reptilian, war-hungry aliens swarmed the station, firing plasma cannons into the civilian quarters. Mason switched to comms. "Outpost 17, this is Sergeant Mason Cole. Do you copy?" A broken voice answered. "We're under heavy fire. Shields at 10%. We can't hold much longer." "Hang on," Mason said. "I'm coming in." He checked his weapons. His ship had no missiles, no heavy guns, only a small rail cannon and his brain. "Let's see what you bastards think of harmless humans," he muttered. He accelerated straight into the battle zone. The alien raiders turned their ships toward him, firing plasma bursts. Mason rolled his craft through the chaos, weaving between explosions. One shot grazed his wing, another clipped his tail, but he didn't stop. He flew dangerously close to the station, scanning the enemy formation. Then he saw it, a fuel line connecting the Khan command ship to their power cells. Mason smirked. "Got you." He aimed, waited 2 seconds and fired a single rail slug. The shot pierced the fuel line. A chain of explosions erupted across the enemy fleet. Fireballs lit up the black sky. Debris scattered in every direction. The Khan ships panicked, breaking formation. Within minutes, the attack was over. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the aliens watched the live feed in stunned silence. The screens showed one human ship against 10, and somehow the human had won. The Zarthos Councillor finally spoke. "He destroyed an entire fleet alone." Another general hissed, "That was illegal. He violated half of the Union's combat laws." The councillor shook his head slowly. "No, that was survival." When Mason returned, the hangar was silent. Every alien in the room stepped back as he walked through the smoke and heat, helmet in hand. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. The councillor confronted him. "Sergeant Mason, do you realize you broke multiple war regulations? You used civilian equipment for combat. You destroyed enemy vessels without offering surrender. You—" Mason stopped him with a stare. "Councillor," he said softly, "your people were dying. Your laws stopped you from saving them. Mine didn't." The alien leader hesitated. "But you could have caused a massacre." Mason's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. "That wasn't a massacre. That was mercy." The aliens didn't know what to say. None of them had seen such cold precision or such control. Mason turned to leave. Before stepping into the corridor, he added quietly, "You wanted to know what war violations mean to humans? They're not rules we fear. They're rules we wrote, because we've already lived through worse." The doors slid shut behind him. That night, the council gathered in silence. The footage of the battle replayed again and again. No one spoke. For the first time, they looked at humans not as weak diplomats, but as survivors of something far older and darker than any of their wars. One alien whispered, "If that was mercy, what happens when they stop holding back?" No one answered. Far away in his quarters, Mason sat alone by the window. The stars shone coldly outside. He sipped from a metal flask and stared into the void. "Harmless," he muttered. "They keep calling us harmless." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Let's hope they're right. The next morning, the Galactic Council chamber was silent. News of Sergeant Mason Cole's reckless actions had spread across every system. The outpost had been saved, but the alien leaders were furious. To them, he hadn't acted heroically. He had broken their sacred laws of war. In their eyes, humans were supposed to be peaceful observers, not soldiers, not killers. But Mason had just proved otherwise. A loud metallic chime echoed through the silver halls as Mason entered the chamber again. Every pair of alien eyes turned to him. Some looked afraid, some looked angry, and a few looked curious. The Zarthos councillor spoke first, his crystal face glowing faintly under the chamber lights. "Sergeant Mason," he began, "your actions yesterday saved 400 lives, but you also violated 9 interstellar combat rules, 3 peace accords, and destroyed a fleet without authorization." Mason stood straight. "Yes, sir." The councillor's tone hardened. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Mason looked up slowly, his brown eyes calm but cold. "With respect," he said, "I didn't come here to defend myself. I came here to defend your people. You call that a crime? Fine. Then call me guilty. Whispers spread through the chamber. The alien generals shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a scaled creature with glowing orange eyes, hissed, "Humans are dangerous. They act without reason." Mason's reply was quiet but sharp. "No, General. We act when others freeze." Later, the council decided to observe Mason's methods instead of punishing him, partly out of curiosity, partly out of fear. They sent him to a nearby military academy on Zarthos Prime to demonstrate human-style defense tactics. It was meant to be a test. They didn't expect a lesson. The training field shimmered under twin suns. Alien soldiers of different races stood in rows, wearing bright armor and holding energy weapons. They looked confident, their posture perfect, their faces calm. Mason walked in wearing his old, dusty combat suit, scratched, faded, and patched with human insignias. No glowing armor, no shiny gear. He stood before them and said, "All right, let's begin." An alien instructor laughed. "What could we learn from humans?" "You still use bullets and steel." Mason grinned. "Bullets and steel work fine if you aim straight." The instructor's smile faded. The exercise began. Aliens spread out in neat formations, disciplined, predictable, slow. Mason crouched low, vanishing between holographic rocks. He didn't follow any pattern. He moved like smoke, unseen, silent, patient. The alien commander barked orders. "Maintain formation. Keep your shields up." But before they could react, Mason appeared behind them, snatching their energy cores, disabling weapons, and marking kills faster than they could blink, one by one. Their armor sensors flashed red, eliminated. The commander shouted, frustrated, "You're cheating. You're not fighting properly." Mason stopped and looked at him. "Properly? You think war is proper?" He stepped closer. "War isn't clean, Commander. It's survival. It's doing what you must. To live." Silence fell across the field. The aliens stared at him, wide-eyed. For the first time, they saw the truth in his eyes, the kind of look that only came from someone who had been there. That night, a few alien soldiers followed him to the mess hall. They asked him questions, quiet, nervous ones. "Human," one said, his voice trembling slightly. "Why are your kind so ruthless?" Mason looked up from his food. "Ruthless?" He thought for a moment. "Because we had to be, they didn't understand." So he told them. "On Earth," he began slowly, "we fought each other for centuries. Every weapon you've ever imagined, we used it. Fire, gas, machines, even the stars. We burned cities to stop worse monsters from winning. And when it was over, we made rules to stop ourselves from doing it again." The room was silent. The alien stared as if hearing a ghost story. He continued, voice softer now. "You call it cruelty. We call it survival. Because we learned that mercy means nothing if you're dead." One of them whispered, "And you survived." Mason looked at him, eyes dark, full of memories. "Barely." A few days later, a distress signal came from a nearby moon colony. A mining facility had been attacked by the same Khan raiders who'd escaped the last battle. The council was divided. Again. Some wanted to send diplomats. Others wanted to wait for permission from the Union, but the miners didn't have time. When the debate dragged on, Mason slammed his hand on the table. "Every minute you talk, someone dies." "I'm going," the counselor frowned. "You will not act alone again, human." Mason's voice was calm but hard. "Then send whoever has the guts to come with me." Silence. Then, surprisingly, a voice broke through the tension. "I'll go." It was Captain Threx, a reptilian officer known for his strict loyalty to Union law. His scales glimmered emerald under the lights. "If the human acts, I will witness it. I want to see what makes his kind so confident." Mason nodded. "Good, you'll see." The dropship descended through grey clouds and storm winds. Thunder rolled as the colony appeared below. Dark smoke rising from broken towers. Inside, Mason checked his gear. A combat knife, a rifle, 2 grenades. Threx watched in disbelief. "That's all you bring?" Mason smirked. "If I need more, I'm already dead." The ship touched down. The hatch opened to chaos, went fire, screaming debris. The Khan raiders had taken civilians hostage. Their leader, a massive warrior with scarred horns, shouted across the ruins. "Surrender, or we crush every last one of them." Threx started to speak, but Mason raised a hand. "Stay here. He walked out alone. The Khan laughed when they saw him. A human? They sent one human? You are not even armed enough to scare a child. Mason smiled faintly. Maybe not. But you should have brought more men. Before the Khan could react, Mason moved, fast, precise, like a machine. He threw his knife, shot twice, ducked behind rubble, and used a grenade to drop a burning wall between himself and the raiders. The aliens watching from the ship couldn't believe it. Mason was fighting without shields, without drones, just raw human reflex and grit. In minutes, the hostages were free. The Khan commander fled, terrified. When Mason returned covered in dust and blood, Threx stared at him in shock. You disobeyed every order, and still saved them. Mason looked at him tiredly. Orders don't matter when lives do. Back on Zarthos Prime, Threx stood before the council and reported what he saw. He didn't call Mason a criminal. He didn't call him a hero either. He said only one thing. Humans fight like they've already lost everything once, and they'll make sure it never happens again. The chamber fell silent. Even the proudest alien generals had no answer. That night, as the twin suns set behind the silver towers, Mason sat on the balcony of his quarters. The city lights shimmered below. Captain Threx joined him quietly. You could have been killed, he said. Mason shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time. Threx stared at him. Why do you keep risking your life for people who don't understand you? Mason looked at the horizon, voice low. Because someone has to. And because maybe, if they understand, they won't need people like me anymore. Threx nodded slowly, almost respectfully. You are a strange species, human. Mason smiled faintly. Yeah, we get that a lot. He leaned back, watching the stars. Somewhere out there he knew the Khan would strike again, stronger, smarter, and angrier. But that was fine. Because this time, they'd be facing humans who weren't so harmless anymore. The rules of war, the hearing chamber of the Galactic Union, was vast and cold. Columns of silver light stretched to the ceiling, and 1,000 alien eyes watched from the upper tiers. In the center stood Sergeant Mason Cole, unarmed, alone, and very tired. He had saved 2 colonies in less than a week. He had also broken more interstellar regulations than any soldier in recent history. Now the Council wanted answers. The High Chancellor of Zarthos, tall and crystalline, opened the session. Sergeant Mason Cole, he said, his voice echoing like thunder under glass. You are charged with unlawful combat, destruction of enemy property without surrender notice, and the unauthorized use of lethal tactics. Do you understand these accusations? Mason nodded. Yes, sir. And how do you plead? He looked up. Guilty. But I'd do it again. A wave of whispers spread through the chamber. Some aliens hissed in anger. Others stared at him with uneasy curiosity. The Chancellor frowned. You admit it so easily. Mason's voice stayed calm. Because you're judging me by your rules. But you asked me to protect lives, and that's what I did. The Counselor of Law, a thin creature of shimmering skin, leaned forward. Your actions caused great fear across the systems. You humans claim to be peaceful, yet you act like predators. How can you call this defense? Mason took a breath. I'll tell you. But you need to understand something first. Humans didn't invent war. We survived it. He tapped the small tablet on the table. The lights dimmed and a hologram flickered to life. Ancient footage from Earth, cities in ruins. Soldiers trudging through mud and smoke. Skies burning red from explosions. The aliens gasped. They had never seen destruction like it. This, Mason said quietly, was our planet, centuries ago. He pointed at the flickering soldiers, dirty, scared, carrying wounded comrades. We fought each other for resources, for territory, for beliefs. We destroyed ourselves so many times we almost didn't make it. So we wrote rules, not to make warfare, but to keep it from ending everything. One alien general muttered, "Primitive chaos." Mason turned toward him. Maybe, but we learned. You call it the laws of war. We call it the Geneva Conventions. The counselors whispered to their translators. Confused by the unfamiliar words, Mason continued, It means protect civilians, treat prisoners humanely. Don't torture, don't poison, don't burn whole worlds. Those rules weren't made by saints. They were made by people who saw what happens when mercy dies, he paused. And that's why what you call war violations. For us, they're reminders. We wrote them in blood. The Chancellor stared at the hologram of a mushroom-shaped cloud rising above an ancient city. This is Terrible, he whispered. Why would your kind keep such memories? So we never forget, Mason said simply. Every scar, every name, because forgetting makes it happen again. The hall was silent. No one spoke as the projection showed endless rows of graves, small and white under a grey sky. Finally, a young alien envoy stood up. If your species suffered so much, she asked softly, why not abandon violence completely? Why still train soldiers? Mason looked down at his hands. Because peace doesn't protect itself. There's always someone who thinks rules are weakness. And when that day comes, someone has to stand between them and the innocent. He looked around the chamber. I stood there twice, and both times I saw hesitation kill more than any bullet. The Counselor of Ethics spoke next, voice trembling. But our union is built on restraint. We cannot allow such brutality to spread. Mason met his gaze. You call it brutality. I call it responsibility. When the Khan raiders came, you waited for permission. If I had waited too, your colonies would be ash and bones. Sometimes restraint is just another word for surrender. The Ethics Counselor had no reply. The Chancellor rubbed his crystal brow. So what do you suggest, human? That we abandon our laws? No, Mason said firmly. Keep your laws. But understand why we fight. You think humans love war. We don't. We just know what happens when good people do nothing. He switched off the hologram. Darkness returned to the chamber, heavy and silent. At the far end, Captain Threx, the reptilian officer who had fought beside him, rose from his seat. He addressed the council. I was there, he said. I saw this human save hundreds without losing control. He could have destroyed us all, but he didn't. If that is a violation, then maybe our rules are wrong, gasps echoed. A council guard tried to silence him, but the Chancellor raised a hand. Let him speak, Threx continued, his voice rising. We mocked them as savages, but I saw compassion in his eyes even as he fought. Humans bleed, they burn, and they still choose to protect others. Maybe that's what makes them dangerous. Mason turned to him and gave a small nod. Then he looked back at the council. You asked what war violations mean to us, he said. It means crossing the line where survival ends and cruelty begins. We built that line ourselves because no one else could do it for us. The Chancellor leaned forward. And what happens, he asked quietly, when someone crosses that line? Mason's eyes hardened. Then they meet someone like me. A chill passed through the hall. No one doubted him. The council called a recess. As the aliens whispered among themselves, Mason stepped outside onto the terrace. The twin suns of Zarthos burned orange across the clouds, beautiful and distant. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold wind brush his scarred face. Captain Threx joined him. You changed their minds today, he said. Mason shook his head. No, I scared them. Threx tilted his head. Maybe fear is a start. Mason gave a faint smile. It always is. That night the council voted. By a narrow margin, they decided not to punish Mason. Instead, they issued a statement. Human tactics are extreme but effective. Further study required. Across the galaxy, military academies replayed his battle footage, analyzing every move, every choice. The phrase human rules of war became a new topic of training, half fear, half respect. But far from the council, another message traveled through dark space. A Khan warlord watched the human footage with burning yellow eyes. So, he growled, the Union hides behind Earth's pets now. Let them. We will break their rules. And theirs. He slammed a clawed fist on the table, snarling. Prepare the fleet. On Zarthos Prime, Mason sat alone in his quarters. The stars reflected in his glass of water. He felt the weight of what had happened. The Council had seen a glimpse of humanity's past, and now they were rewriting their future. He didn't know whether that was a good thing or a dangerous one. He whispered to himself, they wanted peacekeepers. They got survivors. He looked out at the endless stars, each one a possible battlefield, and his voice turned low and certain. They still think we're harmless. Let's hope they never make us prove otherwise. The council chamber was quiet, too quiet. Only the soft hum of energy fields filled the silence. The decision had been made. Sergeant Mason Cole was free. But peace on Zarthos Prime did not last long. A transmission arrived that morning, full of static, screams, and smoke. The image flickered onto the council's main screen, a space station burning, its defense lines broken. Then came the voice, deep, cold, confident. This is Warlord Kargan of the Khan Dominion. The Galactic Union has grown weak. You will surrender your outer colonies, or be erased. The message ended with a single symbol, a red claw slashed through a silver star. Every alien in the room felt the same cold dread. The Chancellor turned toward Mason. "You warned us this would happen," he said softly. Mason stood with his arms crossed, eyes hard as stone. "Yes, and now it's too late for debates." The alien general of ethics protested. "We must open diplomatic channels. We cannot risk another war." Mason's answer was calm but sharp. "You're already in one. The Khan Dominion wasn't new. Hundreds of years ago, before the Galactic Union even existed, they had conquered half the galaxy. Their empire had only fallen after mysterious internal collapse, something even historians called the Forgotten War. Now, they were back, stronger, smarter, and angrier. The Union had grown soft during peace, too dependent on rules, councils, and votes. They forgot what it meant to fight for survival. But humans remembered. A day later, Mason stood in the observation bay staring at the stars. Next to him, Captain Threx adjusted his uniform, his scales shimmering under the light. "They will try to negotiate," Threx said bitterly. "They always do." "They'll die trying," Mason replied. Threx looked at him uneasy. "You sound almost—" "Certain I am," Mason turned to him. "The Khan don't talk, they test. They push, they take, and if you give them an inch, they'll take your world." Threx lowered his head. "Then what do we do?" Mason's voice was low. "We prepare." Inside the War Council chamber, the debate had reached chaos. Half the leaders demanded peace talks. The other half wanted to flee and hide their fleets. No one wanted to listen to a human marine until Mason spoke. He walked to the center of the room, placed a small device on the table, and pressed a button. The hologram projected ancient footage again, but this time it wasn't Earth's past. It was the Khan Dominion. They had scales like molten iron, claws like knives, and ships shaped like blades. The footage came from lost archives of an earlier civilization, their last broadcast before extinction. The aliens watched in silence as the footage showed burning worlds, enslaved cities, and battles fought in hopelessness. Mason's voice broke the silence. Negotiation didn't stop them before. Mercy didn't stop them. Only one thing did, and total resistance. The Chancellor frowned. "You suggest we fight a war we cannot win?" Mason looked at him steadily. "You don't have to win every fight. You just have to survive long enough for them to bleed." Gasps rippled through the room. The ethics counselor slammed his hand on the table. "This is barbaric. You want us to become monsters?" Mason leaned closer, his tone deadly calm. "You think I want this? You think anyone who's seen war wants more of it? But if you don't prepare, you'll lose everything." The council still hesitated. So Mason changed tactics. He connected his tablet again, this time showing Earth's classified war records, mushroom clouds, orbital bombardments, armies fighting in toxic rain, cities reduced to ashes, yet still humanity rebuilt. "Your people would have died after the first defeat," he said. "But we didn't. We learned. Because every time we fell, we came back stronger." He looked directly at the Chancellor. "That's why you invited humans into the Union, not because we're kind. Because we remember what fear tastes like, and we don't run from it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Threx rose again. "If we are to fight," he said, "who will lead us?" Mason turned toward him slowly. The room went silent again. The Chancellor exhaled, the crystals on his chest glowing faintly. "Sergeant Mason Cole," he said, "would you take command of our defense forces?" Mason looked shocked for the first time. "I'm a Marine, not a politician." "Exactly," Threx said. "That's why we trust you." Within days, Mason was standing on the command deck of the Vanguard, the Union's largest battleship. Alien engineers worked beside human officers. Dozens of species, some who had never spoken before, now trained under his command. He looked out at the fleet through the viewport. Rows of ships gleamed under starlight, hundreds of them. They were untested, nervous, but ready. He spoke to them over the intercom. "This isn't Earth's war. This isn't about pride or revenge. This is about survival. You don't have to like it. You just have to stand together. Because if the Khan break us here, they'll burn everything behind us." The fleet answered with a single thunderous cheer, alien voices unified in one echo. That night, Mason sat alone in the dim command room. A quiet alarm beeped on his tablet. Incoming message. Encrypted. He opened it. It wasn't from the Council. It was from a human intelligence unit on Earth. Mason, our scans confirm Khan activity near Varthos Gate. They're massing a full invasion force. You have 7 days. Command. He closed the message and leaned back in his chair. The stars outside looked peaceful, almost mocking. 7 days to prepare a galaxy that had forgotten what war truly was. The next morning, the Council held one last meeting before the storm. The Chancellor looked older now, his crystal face dim. Do you truly believe we can survive this, human? Mason's gaze was steady. I believe you can learn, and if you do, that's enough. He turned to leave, but the Chancellor stopped him. Why help us? He asked. We treated you as a savage. We feared you. Mason paused at the doorway. Then he said quietly, because I've seen what happens when good people wait too long, and because peace is worth fighting for, even when no one else will. He walked out, the doors closing behind him with a deep metallic echo. Far away, beyond the rim of Union space, the Khan Dominion fleet emerged from the void, thousands of warships shaped like blades, their engines burning red. Warlord Kargan stood at the command window, smiling. Prepare the broadcast, he said. We will remind this galaxy what real war looks like. Back on the Vanguard, Mason watched the radar as the red dots began to appear. 1, then 10, then hundreds. The stars themselves seemed to vanish behind the incoming armada. He clenched his fists. Let them come, he muttered. We'll teach them the human definition of survival. The Varthos Gate floated in the dark void like a sleeping god, a massive ring of metal and light, large enough for whole fleets to pass through. It marked the border between galactic Union space and the uncharted wilds beyond. And now it was the front line. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Sergeant Mason Cole stood before a wide tactical display. Thousands of red dots glowed, the Khan Dominion fleet. They filled the void like a storm, each warship pulsing with the heat of plasma engines. Report, Mason said quietly. 17 minutes until they reach firing range, answered Threx, his scaled hands trembling slightly. Our outer defense satellites are ready, but there are too many of them. Mason's jaw tightened. Then we make them choke on their numbers. The alien officers looked at him, unsure, nervous. Mason could see it in their eyes, fear. They had never fought a real war before. Not like this. He pressed a button on the console. The fleet-wide channel opened. His voice echoed through every ship, every crew. Listen up. You've trained for peace your whole lives. You think war is about power? It's not. War is about endurance. It's about standing your ground when everything tells you to run. He paused, his tone sharp and steady. You're scared. Good. That means you understand what's coming. But remember this, fear doesn't control us. We control it, because if we don't, someone else will. For a second, no one spoke. Then the intercom filled with alien voices shouting one word over and over. Varthos! 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 Mason allowed himself a small smile. Good. Let's give them a welcome. The first strike, the Khan fleet entered the outer defense zone, and the void exploded. Dozens of plasma mines detonated in blinding light. The first wave of Khan ships vanished in clouds of fire. But more poured through, their shields glowing red-hot. Alien officers cheered, thinking victory had come early. But Mason didn't. He knew better. They're testing us, he said. This isn't their main force. Seconds later, the radar confirmed it. A massive spike appeared on the edge of the system. The Khan flagship, 10 times larger than the Vanguard, emerged from the shadows. Its hull was carved with glowing scars, trophies from past conquests. Contact in 60 seconds, shouted Threx. Mason turned to his communications officer. Send the signal. Phase 2. Phase 2, the human tactics across the Union fleet. Ships began to scatter, moving in irregular, unpredictable patterns. The alien admirals were confused. Why are we breaking formation? One demanded. Because straight lines get you killed, Mason said. Humans fight dirty. From hidden launchers, hundreds of decoy drones deployed, mimicking ship signals. The Khan fleet fired volley after volley at empty space. Then Mason gave the next command. Activate EMP nets. A silent pulse spread through the void, invisible and devastating. Half the Khan fighters went dark, drifting lifelessly. Cheers erupted through the bridge. Even Threx grinned. It's working! Mason's eyes stayed on the screen. Not yet. Wait for it. A moment later, the Khan flagship fired something huge, a burning blue beam that tore through space. It vaporized 3 Union ships instantly. Now it's working, Mason said grimly. They're getting serious. Close combat. The fleets clashed head-on. Beams, plasma bursts, and explosions filled the dark. For hours, the stars themselves vanished behind clouds of debris. Inside the Vanguard, the bridge shook violently. Panels sparked. An officer screamed as an explosion rocked the left flank. Threx shouted, "We're losing control of Sector 9. Mason barked orders. "Redirect power. Pull the cruisers back behind the gate. Use the debris as cover." The aliens hesitated. Their instincts screamed for retreat. But Mason's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your line. The moment you give them an opening, they'll crush you." He grabbed the comm again. "All ships, listen carefully. If your ship goes down, ram the enemy before you die. Make every loss cost them something." The turning point hours passed. Half the Union fleet was gone. The Varthos gate burned from constant impacts. Still, Mason refused to retreat. On the flagship, Warlord Kargan watched with amusement. He spoke through a booming transmission. "Impressive, human. You fight like an animal." "But you are still prey," Mason answered calmly. "You think you've seen what humans can do. You've only seen the easy part." He cut the channel and turned to Threx. "Prepare Phase 3. Threx blinked. "You mean the scorched zone?" "Exactly." He hesitated. "That's suicide." Mason's voice was low. "Not if it works. Phase 3. Scorched zone." The Varthos gate had an unstable power core, enough to open a wormhole the size of a moon. Mason planned to overload it. He ordered the remaining ships to fall back behind the gate. The Khan fleet, thinking the humans were retreating, followed eagerly. "Sir, if we trigger it now, the blast could destroy half our fleet," Threx shouted. Mason looked at him. "Half isn't all." He pressed the final command key. The Varthos gate began to glow, brighter and brighter, until the entire void shimmered with violet light. Warlord Kargan's eyes widened. "What are they doing?" Then the gate exploded. A wave of energy ripped through space, swallowing hundreds of Khan ships in seconds. The shockwave reached the Vanguard, tossing it like a leaf in a storm. Metal screamed. Lights died. Silence followed. When the light faded, the stars returned. The Khan flagship was gone, along with most of their fleet. The few survivors retreated into hyperspace, engines burning. On the bridge, alarms blared. Smoke filled the air. Mason struggled to stand, blood on his forehead. "Status," he croaked. Threx, coughing, replied, We did it. They're gone." Mason stared at the wreckage through the viewport. A graveyard of ships, both alien and human. He whispered, "No one wins in war. We just survive it." Aftermath hours later, emergency crews worked across the shattered ships. The Council sent a transmission. "Sergeant Mason Cole, the Union owes you its survival. Your methods were unorthodox but effective." Mason didn't reply. He sat in silence, staring at the stars. Threx approached him. "You saved millions. They'll call you a hero." Mason shook his head. "Heroes don't start wars. They end them." Threx looked at him quietly. "Then what are you?" Mason's eyes were distant. A reminder. As the wrecked fleets drifted near the burning gate, Mason gave one last order. "Send a message to the Khan Dominion. Tell them this was restraint." Threx blinked. "Restraint." Mason nodded slowly. "Next time we won't hold back." He turned away as the stars reflected in his cracked visor, light from a battle that would be remembered for centuries. The stars over Varthos Gate were quiet again. The screams had stopped. The explosions were gone. Only the silence of space remained, deep, endless, and heavy. Wrecked ships drifted like ghosts through the void. Fragments of hulls floated past like dying embers, each one carrying memories of lives lost. And in the middle of that graveyard, the Vanguard still moved, slowly, painfully, but alive. Sergeant Mason Cole stood on the bridge, surrounded by flickering lights and broken consoles. The air smelled of burnt metal and ozone. "Every breath hurt. How many?" he asked quietly. Captain Threx checked the readings. 70% of our fleet gone. Over 30,000 confirmed dead. And still counting. Mason didn't move. He just stared out the viewport at the debris field. Small escape pods glimmered in the distance, blinking weakly. Get every survivor out there, he said. No one gets left behind. Hours passed. Search drones weaved between floating wrecks, collecting escape pods and drifting bodies. Medical bays overflowed with the wounded. Aliens of every species lying side by side, whispering prayers in a dozen languages. When Mason entered the infirmary, every conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes followed him, some grateful, some hollow. They all knew he had saved them, but they also knew what it had cost. A young alien soldier, her arm bandaged, looked up at him. "You won," she said softly. Mason stopped beside her bed. "No," he said. "We survived." "That's not the same thing." Later, the Council of Zarthos sent a holographic message. The Chancellor's image appeared before Mason, transparent and regal. "Sergeant Mason Cole," the Chancellor said, "you have achieved what no one believed possible. The Khan Dominion has retreated. You saved the Union." Mason didn't answer. "Your tactics," the Chancellor continued, "were unconventional. Many call them brutal, but we cannot deny their effectiveness. You will be awarded the Star of the Union, the highest honor." Mason looked down. His face was unreadable. "Keep your medals," he said finally. "I didn't fight for them." The Chancellor looked surprised. "Then why did you fight, human?" Mason raised his eyes. "For the ones who can't." Then he ended the transmission. When the room was quiet again, Mason leaned against the wall, exhausted. Threx entered quietly, carrying 2 metal cups. He handed one to Mason. "It's not human coffee," he said, "but it helps." Mason gave a tired smile. "Thanks." They stood side by side, looking out at the dark. After a long silence, Threx asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Mason didn't answer immediately. He stared at the stars, thinking of the lives lost. Soldiers, engineers, medics, people who had never wanted to fight. Finally, he said softly, "Every day." "But if regret stops you from protecting others, then you're already dead," Threx nodded slowly. "You humans, you carry your pain differently." Mason looked at him. "We don't carry it. We learn from it, because pain teaches what peace forgets." A few days later, the fleet returned to Zarthos Prime. When Mason stepped off the transport ramp, thousands of aliens lined the landing platform. They didn't cheer. They just stood, silent, respectful. It wasn't celebration. It was mourning. Banners of every race hung above the city, half burned and half torn. The Union had survived, but it had changed. They all had. As Mason walked past, an alien child saluted him clumsily. He stopped, knelt, and handed her his old Earth military badge. She blinked. "What's this?" "It's a reminder," he said softly, "of what war really costs." That night the council held a ceremony. The hall was filled with shimmering lights and the hum of alien music. Every surviving commander stood in line, their faces proud but heavy. The Chancellor stepped forward. "This man," he said, pointing to Mason, "taught us that strength is not cruelty, that mercy and survival can exist together, but only if we have the courage to defend them." He raised a golden medal. "Sergeant Mason Cole of Earth, we honor you as Defender of the Union." Applause filled the chamber, echoing off the walls. But Mason didn't move. He looked around, at the faces of those who had fought beside him, those who had lost everything, and shook his head. "I can't accept that," he said. The hall went silent. The Chancellor frowned. "Why?" Mason took a deep breath. "Because I didn't defend the Union. I defended people. There's a difference. Your governments, your laws, they'll go back to normal soon. But those people out there, the ones who saw what war really means, they won't forget." He looked down at his scarred hands. "No medal can change what we did to survive." He placed the medal back on the table and walked out. The crowd parted silently as he passed. Outside, the night sky glowed faintly blue. Threx caught up to him on the balcony. "You could have taken it," he said. "You earned it." Mason leaned on the railing, staring at the stars. "Earning something doesn't mean you deserve it." They stood quietly. The wind blew through the alien trees below. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Threx said softly, "The Khan will come back one day." Mason nodded. "I know. And when they do?" Mason's voice was calm, but there was a shadow behind it. "Then we remind them again why humanity survived its own extinction." A few days later, Mason visited the memorial field. Rows of white stones stretched into the horizon, alien names, human names. names written in a dozen scripts. He walked between them slowly, leaving a small Earth flag beside each fallen human. He stopped at one grave, a young alien pilot who had followed his orders to the end. Her name glowed softly under the alien sky. He placed his helmet beside it and whispered, "You didn't die for nothing." A soft wind blew, carrying the faint hum of the memorial song, a melody created by combining all the Union's national anthems into one. It was haunting, beautiful, and it hurt. As he turned to leave, a group of alien cadets approached him, new recruits, barely adults. One stepped forward nervously. "Commander Cole, sir," she said. "We've studied your battle strategies. They're calling them the human tactics." Mason sighed. "Don't," the cadet blinked. "Don't what?" "Don't turn war into a lesson," he said. "It's not something to study. Here's something to remember, so you never repeat it." The cadets nodded quietly and walked away. Mason watched them go, a mix of sadness and pride in his eyes. That night he sat alone in his quarters writing a report for Earth Command. When he finished, he didn't send it. He just stared at the last line he'd written. "Peace isn't free. It's paid for by those who never get to see it." He closed the file, powered down the tablet, and looked out the window. The galaxy was quiet now, too quiet. He could almost feel it watching him, holding its breath. Mason whispered to himself, "We won the battle. Now we have to win the silence." 20 years had passed since the Battle of Varthos Gate. The scars of war were still written across the stars, silent wrecks drifting in forgotten orbits, rusted metal swallowed by the void. But the galaxy had changed. The union of worlds was stronger now. Planets that once hated each other now traded, built together, dreamed together. And on every world, in every academy, one lesson was remembered: humanity's war. In the great galactic history hall of Zarthos Prime, a crowd gathered. Thousands of beings filled the massive chamber, their eyes focused on the central figure, a tall bronze statue of a man, armor-scarred, helmet under his arm, eyes carved to look toward the stars. A plaque below the statue read, "Sergeant Mason Cole, the human who taught the galaxy, the cost of peace children of 100 races," looked up at the monument. Teachers whispered stories of the war, of how one human soldier had shown the galaxy what war truly meant. Not glory, not conquest, but survival and sacrifice. At the back of the hall, an old man watched quietly. He wore a plain coat, no medals, no armor. Only a faint scar across his cheek gave away who he once was: Mason Cole. He smiled faintly as he listened to the whispers of children repeating his name, their voices innocent, unaware of the pain behind the story. An alien historian noticed him and gasped softly. "Commander Cole, it's really you." Mason turned slowly. His voice was calm. "Just Mason now." The historian bowed slightly. "You're a legend. The Union owes you everything." Mason shook his head. "No one owes me anything. They owe the fallen, all of them, human and alien." The historian hesitated, then said, "We built this monument to remind future generations of your courage." Mason looked up at his own statue. "Then make sure they remember the fear too," he said softly, "because courage means nothing without fear." Outside the hall, the sky of Zarthos Prime shimmered with thousands of floating drones, each projecting holograms of names, the soldiers who died to protect the Union. Every planet's anthem played softly in the background, merging into one haunting melody. Mason walked through the memorial garden. He stopped beside a small lake, where the holograms reflected off the water like starlight. For a moment he saw his reflection among them, old, tired, but alive. He knelt down and touched the water. "You'd laugh if you saw this, wouldn't you, Threx?" he murmured. His old friend Captain Threx had died years ago from radiation exposure, one last consequence of that war. But Mason still spoke to him sometimes, as if the stars carried his words. Later that evening, Mason sat outside his small house on the edge of the city. He lived quietly, no servants, no bodyguards, just him and the quiet hum of the night. He was sipping tea when a hovercraft landed nearby. A young alien officer stepped out, saluting sharply. Mason, the council sent me. They want to speak with you." Mason raised an eyebrow. "After 20 years? What do they want now?" "They say a new threat has appeared near the outer colonies. They want your advice." Mason looked toward the horizon, the sky glowing faintly red as two suns set. Then he smiled sadly. Advice is easy. Peace is not. The officer looked confused. Does that mean you'll help? Mason stood slowly. His bones ached, but his eyes were still sharp. I'll listen, he said. But they won't like what I have to say. The council chamber was just as he remembered. Towering ceilings, glowing sigils, representatives of 100 worlds. When Mason entered, the room fell silent. The Chancellor, now much older, rose to greet him. Mason Cole, he said, his voice echoing. It's been a long time, Mason nodded. It has. The Chancellor projected a hologram in the air. Fleets of unknown ships massing beyond the galactic border. We believe they call themselves the Vorkal Dominion. They demand surrender or war. Mason studied the hologram quietly. Then he said, You already know my answer. The Chancellor sighed. You would have us fight again? No, Mason said softly. I would have you remember. The council looked at each other in confusion. Remember what, human? Remember what war costs, Mason said. You built peace on the graves of millions. Don't throw it away because you're afraid. If they want war, make them see that peace is more dangerous. Silence filled the hall. The Chancellor leaned forward. You mean diplomacy? Mason gave a faint smile. You're learning. He turned to leave but stopped at the door. Just remember, he said, looking back, humanity didn't survive because we loved war. We survived because we never stopped fearing it. Then he walked out, leaving the council deep in thought. That night Mason returned home. The stars above Zarthos Prime burned bright, billions of lights stretching forever. He sat down, opened an old holo device, and watched a recording, a message he had kept all these years. It was from Threx. If you're watching this, Threx's voice said, then you outlived us all, old friend. Remember, the galaxy will forget how the war began, but it will remember how you ended it. Mason smiled sadly. Maybe, he whispered. Maybe not. He turned off the holo, leaned back, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The next morning, a young cadet knocked on his door, a student from the academy. She held a small notebook and looked nervous. Sir, she said, I'm writing my graduation essay. It's about humanity's greatest lesson. Can I ask you one question? Mason nodded. Go ahead, she hesitated. After all the pain, all the war, what did humanity really teach us? Mason thought for a long moment. Then he said softly, that mercy isn't weakness, that strength isn't anger, and that peace is something you build, even when it breaks you. The cadet blinked, her eyes shining. Thank you, sir. As she turned to leave, Mason looked up at the morning sky, soft gold light spilling over the alien city. He smiled faintly. Not bad, Earth, he whispered. We did something right after all. Later that day, a gentle wind swept across the garden. The hollow monuments shimmered, projecting new names, those who had recently passed. And among them, one new name appeared in soft blue light, Mason Cole, human, Earth. He taught the galaxy the meaning of humanity. The statue in the Hall of History seemed to glow a little brighter that night. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, the echoes of a human soldier's voice whispered across the void. Peace isn't given. It's earned.